Chapter 371, Hurry and Stop Mr. Fang. System, are you sure that you're not playing tricks on me? Mr. Fang looked at the route showed on the system interface and found the destination extending all the way to the northwest from the southeast. It's so far from here. Also, why are the players of our shop being tortured? Mr. Fang yelled. I've never heard of anyone being tortured because of playing games. Do they take playing games as a crime? Do you think you can fool me with this nonsense? The system didn't respond as if it were saying, suit yourself. Can I really win a prize for body strengthening? Mr. Fang asked, do you have a simple item that can strengthen my power without hurting me? After all, when he used the T-virus, which was claimed to have no side effects, he had suffered from excruciating pain. He didn't want to experience that again. Meanwhile, the price for increasing his strength in the movie and TV series Cultivation Room or the game Cultivation Room was being beaten senseless, which was why Mr. Fang was reluctant to cultivate using this method. System, with host's luck, it's highly likely that you will win a game or a movie. So, don't think of the impossible things. Damn it. Will you die if you just remain silent? Mr. Fang's face twitched. After all, he had a chance to win a prize after the sales target of Grand Theft Auto 5 was reached. He just didn't believe that he couldn't win something good. At this moment, Su Tianji, Yi Zie, and a few other people who hadn't gone online yet were talking casually about why some players in the guild had been absent. Then, Mr. Fang took a piece of paper and a pencil to them and drew something on the paper. You guys, have a look of it. If Dajin is in this position, he pointed at the bottom right corner of the map and then at the upper left position above the center. Where's this place roughly? After all, Mr. Fang had a terrible sense of direction and wouldn't recognize the place even if he had a map. What place, what position? Su Tianji was the first to look over, and she stared at the map where Mr. Fang only drew out Dajin, which only occupied a small region. Dajin is so small here. Then, at that position, Phoenix Mountain? She shook her head. No, Phoenix Mountain is more to the right. It might be the Taixi Saint faction. Why do you ask? Taixi Saint faction? Mr. Fang pondered. What faction is it? A saint faction? Is it very powerful? Of course, Su Tianji said. It's one of the most ancient factions on this continent. The Yundian Upper Realm which attacked Dajin last time was quite powerful, right? But it's just a minion of the three saint factions. Is the Yundian Upper Realm very powerful? Mr. Fang said, didn't you capture the leaders of their army, and they were only released after compensating a mountain of crystals? Su Tianji's face turned dark. Are you thinking of messing with them? I'll warn you. You won't have a chance unless the senior behind you shows his hand. I advise you to give up the plan if you want to go there yourself. You will save a lot of headaches. Why would I want to mess with them? Mr. Fang said with a smirk. I don't know them. Do you think I'm someone who wants to travel tens of thousands of kilometers to make trouble for them? You'd better not. Su Tianji gave him a hard stare and said, I warned you for your own good. After all, your current cultivation strength is not enough to make a dent on them. Mr. Fang nodded, saying, of course. With the map in his hand, Mr. Fang scratched his head. Are you trying to trick me? It's one of the most ancient factions, and it is probably full of grandmasters without thinking. I'm only at the Grand Ancestor Warrior realm, and you want me to mess with them? What if I can make it back? Perhaps you want to get me killed, so you can find a new host? It's really not decent of you. After a long while, the system interface showed, please explore it yourself. Host explore. Damn it. Mr. Fang looked sullen. You just want me to get beaten in the cultivation room, right? Okay. He checked his time limit for the cultivation rooms and found he had 1 day in the movie and TV series Cultivation Room and 2 days in the game Cultivation Room. Well, soon, Fangky returned to his room and began the next stage of cultivation. Should I level up Sword God? Mr. Fang looked at Li Xiao before him with a frown. No, my cultivation isn't high enough for it, and I'll benefit little from it. I must find someone with moderate cultivation strength. Soon, a young man wearing a brown uniform with flames in his hands appeared before him. He was Kyo Kusanagi from King of Fighters 97. He launched one punch with horrifying red flames around it. The strength he released here was much higher compared to in the game. Mr. Fang launched the same fist technique with the violent ki in his body, crashing it forward viciously. 1 day in the real world was 1 year in the virtual world. After Mr. Fang spent 2 years in the game Cultivation Room, The spiritual light in his eyes looked sharper and purer, as if flames were jumping in them. Like a volcano which would erupt at any moment, he emitted an explosive power even when he remained still. Immediately, Fei went to the next destination. A crude straw house in a bamboo forest appeared before him with the melancholic music of an erhu. TL note: the erhu, or erhin, is a two-stringed bowed musical instrument, more specifically a spike fiddle, which may also be called a southern fiddle, and sometimes known in the Western world as the Chinese violin or a Chinese two-stringed fiddle. A middle-aged man who was wearing a grayish-blue robe stood up with a mild expression. He was holding an erhu in his hands. He was no name, a hermit who had no interest in worldly affairs, from the world of wind and cloud. 0% strength. The current no-name wasn't the no-name who battled with Zhu Sheng with only 10% of his strength left in his body. He was at the very peak of Sword Dao, heavenly sword. He looked mild and serene, strolling like an ordinary person who was taking a walk in the courtyard. He didn't look like he was about to be in a battle at all. However, at this moment, Fang Qi sensed a sword spirit which soared up high into the clouds, looking down at the creatures on the land. At this moment, all the swords in the world submitted to it. The sword in Fang Qi's hand shook continuously as if it was going to kneel like a civilian before the emperor. Half a day passed in the real world. A young man was walking up along the mountain path from the foot of Amai mountain. Suddenly, many flying sabers crashed down from the sky like a crazy storm. Dan Chenzi. The moment that Mr. Fang used innumerable sword scroll, a horrifying flood of many flight sabers instantly destroyed his flight sword. Mr. Fang's face turned dark. FCK. He was instantly killed. Kunlun Mountain. Xuanhuan. A blue crystal flame suddenly shot toward him. Mr. Fang died. Damn it. He was instantly killed again. Golden Peak of Amai Mountain. Old White Brow. Heavenly Mirror. Mr. Fang. After getting beaten in the cultivation rooms for years, only a few days had passed in the real world. When Mr. Fang walked down from upstairs, he had jelly legs and dark circles under his eyes. Sir, tell us about what you did last night. The people who sat on the couch and ate instant noodles looked at him in doubt and suspicion. I was cultivating. Mr. Fang said, tomorrow, I plan to raise the so-called Taixi Saint faction to the ground. Is there anyone who wants to go with me? Pooh. Su Tianji instantly spat out a mouthful of coke. After spitting out the coke that she had just drank, she stared at Fang Qi dumbfoundedly. Do you remember what you promised me? All of them looked at each other and shouted, hurry, stop him. A few days ago, he had been at the early stage of Grand Ancestor Warrior Realm. Now, he had just reached the late stage of this realm. However, he insisted on messing with the Taixi faction. Had he gone mad? Chapter 372. Target: Taixi faction. Don't stop me. Is the Taixi faction so FCKING powerful? I can deal with 10 of them. Mr. Fang, who had been beaten senseless in the cultivation rooms for a long time, yelled wildly. You can deal with 10 of their disciples? But they have 100 or even 1,000 elite disciples. They pointed out the flaw in Mr. Fang reasoning without mercy. How do you know that I can deal with 100 or 1,000 of them? Ziyu, come and stop your boss. A group of people surrounded Mr. Fang, cutting off all the paths. Can you tell us why you must go and raise the Taixi faction to the ground? Nailin Hong asked solemnly. Kid Fang, waging war isn't a game. If you are not careful, people will die. Explain yourself first. I, an old man who has lived long enough, don't mind going with you on a wild mission, but you can't lead others into danger, right? The others looked at Fang Qi in bafflement as well. After all, the lofty Taixi faction and Mr. Fang moved in different circles, and they wondered how the former had messed with him. Right, Su Tianji chimed in. Tell us the trouble that you are facing, so we can help you. Otherwise, we will worry about you after you go and mess with the Taixi faction. Although cultivation strength didn't represent 100% of one's true power was limited if one's cultivation strength wasn't high. Even true immortals couldn't maintain their power and status if they lost their cultivation strength. Right now, Mr. Fang's realm wasn't even that high. Besides, he was going to the headquarters of the Taixi faction where traps and arrays were everywhere, and it wouldn't be a safe trip even for people with many trump cards. Raising people's headquarters to the ground is what I do best. If you submit to me and call me Saint Lord respectfully. A dark cloud floated over. Boom. Ah, kid, you'll die pathetically for beating me, the Saint Lord. With a shrilling scream, it was kicked back upstairs. After this small interlude, Mr. Fang was about to explain it when Su Tianji's communication jade blinked. Meanwhile, Others including Ji Woo, who was playing the Legend of Mare 2, also found their communication jades blinking rapidly. They all received the same message: factions have gathered forces and sent troops to 3 borders of Dajin. What's happening? All of them were nonplussed. What are the major factions and forces doing at the borders of Dajin? They wondered. Outside Cold Stone Fort in the north region of Dajin country, many spiritual boats and cultivators gathered in the sky before Dajin's border. The guarding soldiers of Cold Stone Fort were ready for battle with grim expressions. What brings you to Dajin's fort? A general asked loudly. A Taoist wearing a white Taoist robe with patterns of divinatory symbols shouted back, "Tell your emperor to hand over the head of Origin's Internet Club, or we'll raise Dajin to the ground and catch him ourselves." What arrogance! You are going too far. While the generals and soldiers cussed at the enemies, Ji Woo, who had received the urgent report from the fort in Origin Internet Club, was livid with fury as well. They are so overbearing. They have absolutely no regard for our Dajin. Mr. Fang shrugged and said, "Do you see it now? It's useless even if you stop me." Aren't they the major factions near the country? Fang Hui asked. What does it have to do with Taixi Saint faction? Su Tianji said with a sneer. Without a mastermind behind them, how can these factions unite with each other? However, Ji Woo looked at Fang Qi in bafflement and said, "Why are they after you, Mr. Fang?" "How would I know?" Mr. Fang shrugged. "I've been at the Morning Star Sea Realm recently." "Is it because of the incident of demon suppressing cauldron?" "Don't worry," Su Tianji said in a loud voice, handing this kid to them. "I won't allow it." "Allow it?" Nalan Hong was said with a cold smile. "Whoever wants to do that must ask for my permission first. Anyone who dares to agree to them would have been kicked out by me," Mr. Fang said with a dark expression. "You want to know why I want to mess with Taixi faction? Do your guilds have missing members?" "They were good and well, but then they just went offline one day as if they had just vanished." "Ugh?" Song King Feng said, "Isn't it the same issue that we talked about a few days ago?" "Is it because Nalan Mingjiu sharply sensed a conspiracy behind the whole thing?" "If she connected everything together from the new members of the guilds who were missing, the disciples from different factions, and the Taixi Saint faction." "Bad news." At this moment, Yi Zhe walked into the shop anxiously and said, "I got the news about those people. Brother Bai Lang, those few cultivators with him, and the new members of your guilds are all imprisoned in a mystic land of the Taixi faction, and what? If it were another time, they would have doubted if such a piece of explosive news was true. But now that the factions had stationed troops at their door, they didn't have a doubt on their mind. And they have been tortured by lightning spells. They must admit that they have contracted a poison named internet addiction here. Otherwise, what? Are the masters and elders of these factions pigs? How can they allow such a thing to happen to their disciples? Where did you get the news?" Yi Songtao asked. "How come I know nothing about it?" Yi Zhe said sadly, "It took Brother Bai great efforts to send information to senior sister Zhu, and I just heard it from her. Hurry up and rescue them." "I am afraid if the Taixi faction knows someone leaked out the news," Ji Woo said with a dark expression, "they won't do anything to the elders and masters of the factions who think we're the villains, but the cultivator who leaked the news will probably be in danger." Mr. Fang shrugged. "Now, do you still want to stop me from going to the Taixi faction?" "They are going too far." Nalan Hong said, "I'll go with you." Su Tianji said in a cold voice, "Me too." "Me as well." "Count me in." "Let's go to the Taixi faction and argue the case." "Argue the case?" "They sent troops to our door." "Let's raise Taixi faction to the ground." The others raised their arms and yelled in agreement. "Okay," Nalan Mingju said, "if we all go, it will fit their plan. We'll leave an unguarded country to them, and they will enter Dajin and raise our country to the ground." "In my opinion, the shop owner and the old man of my family can go to the Taixi faction while the rest of us stay here to guard the country against the troops of the major forces." "I will go as well." Su Tianji was obviously not satisfied with this arrangement. Okay, you just tried to stop me, and now you can't bear to be left behind." "Let's go then." Mr. Fang waved his hand and said, "So, you won't blame me for not taking you along." "It's I who takes you." Su Tianji glared at him and said, "Fine." Mr. Fang showed a harmless expression. "But I must make it clear before we go that I'm not responsible for your safety. If something happened, I'll just run and won't help you." Su Tianji, who had planned to help this kid, was infuriated when she heard his declaration, and she replied in anger, "I don't need your help. Just don't become a burden yourself." "That's settled then," Fang Qi said. The three of us will go to the Taixi faction. Chapter 373. You don't know my intention without seeing the excavator. Alliance Master Lan, what do you think? Jiwoo looked grim. After all, Dajin had never faced such a big threat of war since its establishment. Even the army of the Indian Upper Realm wasn't nearly as big as this one. Jiwoo asked. This time, most of the factions of the cultivation world have joined forces to invade Dajin. If we can't resist them, maybe we should stall them for a few days. If it were before, I would have agreed with your majesty, Lan Mo said, but now, he continued, now that they are at our door, do you think they will allow our stalling strategy? With their combined forces, they think suppressing a country comprised mostly of warriors is as easy as killing an ant, and even Indian Upper Realm wouldn't dare to face their troops directly. Do you think they want to negotiate with us, your majesty? Alliance Master Lan, do you think they have no intention of negotiation and settling this? Jiwoo asked. Then, what are they waiting for? With so many forces in the United Army, they do have the numbers advantage, but they also face the problem of arranging and commanding different forces, Lan Mo said with a chuckle. They are probably discussing how to divide the property in your majesty's royal palace after razing Dajin to the ground. Of course, he was just kidding with the last comment, but he was right that their enemies hadn't unified the command of the army. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given Dajin time to prepare. With the speed of Duke Nalan and his companions, they will soon reach Taixi faction, which is an extremely dangerous place, Lan Mo said mildly. Maybe they will need our help, so we must. He whispered something to Jiwoo. Meanwhile, Li Heron said to the group of artifact masters, as you all know, this wave can be transformed into electrical signals. The spiritual essence that we use can also be transformed into lightning and flames, and some special techniques can even transform lightning and flames back into pure spiritual essence. He held up a piece of heavy jade which was bigger than ordinary communication jades and said, I believe you will think that this communication jade is not small and exquisite, but we can put some special array patterns into this special spiritual light jade and give it some special functions. For example, in the environment where the spiritual essence transmission is interrupted, we can send messages using the new wave-style information delivery method. When the messages enter the ordinary communication jade, they will automatically transform into spiritual essence messages. If we can intercept and decode the special symbols of our enemy's spiritual essence transmission, we can even pretend to be their leaders and issue orders after disrupting their communication, Li Heron said. I'm happy to tell you that it's our artifact master friends in Half City of the Morning Star Sea Realm who provided us with this special artifact making method. I guess they must often read others' messages in secret. The others were amused. In short, our plan is plausible even though it's still crude, Li Heron declared. If we make it a reality, it will be the greatest creation in the history of our cultivation world. Meanwhile in Dajin, 15 warships took off. If the people from Indian Upper Realm were here, they would recognize that these were the Guangxu family's warships. After their defeat, the warships of the Guangxu family were captured and taken by Dajin. After some repairs, they became great war weapons again. Although the Guangxu family was defeated, their warships were unrivaled in the whole cultivation world. Meanwhile, Junior Yangzi and a large group of artifact masters gathered in the artifact room inside the Wu Taoist Alliance. They were looking at a round mirror hovering in the air. The mirror looked neither gold nor jade, and they could see flowers and golden clouds in the vague green light inside the mirror at a closer look. In addition, cloud dragons, rare birds, and tadpole-like ancient characters were engraved on the surface of the mirror. It's done. All the artifact masters were stunned. We truly did it. At this moment, 2 sword beams landed in front of the gate of the Taixi faction in the blink of an eye. Mr. Fang said, I think maybe we can put it on the live stream. Open the live stream. Before Nalan Hong could wake up from his shock, 2 figures appeared on the big screens in the shops. One was an old man with white hair and a white beard, and the other was an ordinary-looking young man wearing a blue robe. Beastards of Taixi faction, come out and receive your deaths. A furious roar shook sky and ground, and the mountains all trembled. It looked as if the Taixi faction's gate would be shaken off as well. FCK, this can be live streamed as well. The shop owner is awesome. They arrived at the Taixi faction so soon. Instantly, the big screen was flooded with bullet comments. Who are you? Shouts of anger and alarm came from the mountain path. Soon, Many disciples of the Taixi faction surrounded the outsiders. Who dares to break into our Taixi faction? Do you know where you are? How dare you cuss our Taixi faction in front of our gate? It's you. At this moment, a gloomy-looking young man wearing a white robe with golden patterns walked up, revealing himself to be Feng Zai. He was a bit surprised when he saw Feng Qi, but then he smiled coldly. I have been planning to go and get you, but you made it easier for me by offering yourself to me to kill. Offering myself to you for you to kill? Mr. Feng said with a faint smile. Are you kidding me? It seems like you don't know my intentions if I don't drive the excavator to this place. Nalan Hongwu's face twitched. What excavator? Feng Zai snorted. These two men insulted our faction in front of our gate. Kill them. Kill us? Nalan Hongwu laughed and said, Kid, aren't you overestimating yourself? A group of cultivators at the True Lake Realm wants to kill me? A warrior of the Emperor Warrior Realm? Feng Zai said with a sneer. Do you think you can disregard our Taixi faction since you can deal with some Divine Ocean Realm cultivators? The Divine Ocean Realm cultivators of the Taixi faction are not the Divine Ocean Realm wastrels in your dungeon. He waved his big sleeve, and the clear sky was instantly covered by dark clouds while spiritual essence began gathering around him. Thunder boomed in the sky as if many carts that were as heavy as Mountain Tai rolled above the thick dark clouds. Feng Zai was only an ordinary disciple whose master was Dwyu Holiness, but he could casually incite heavenly power. Are you shocked? Are you afraid? Standing in the sky like a god, Feng Zai looked down on Nalan Hongwu. You are underestimating our power if you compare us with the ordinary Divine Ocean Realm cultivators whom you can defeat. You'll be shocked if you think we are the same. However, a silver light beam shot into the high sky and the next moment great heavenly power, turn into godly lightning and follow the direction of my sword. Many lightning bolts more powerful than the previous ones began to gather above Mr. Feng's head. Furthermore, the heavenly lightning gathered by Feng Zai's spiritual spell were dragged to the space above Mr. Feng by a mysterious force. Extreme shock and terror appeared on Feng Zai's face. Chapter 374, Disgracing himself in front of people outside the continent. What are you watching? Upon entering the half-city shop, Black Demon and his people saw lightning bolts rolling in the clouds on the big screen. Hurry up and watch this. Tang Yuan, the master of the Yuanhang Pavilion, was watching with great interest and holding a bowl of instant noodles in his hands. He pointed at the big screen with his chopsticks and said, some people near Zhuhai City are inciting the major factions to make trouble for Mr. Fang, and it's said that they even captured many new players who had just joined the guilds. Right now, Mr. Fang is attacking this force's headquarters. Really? This dominating? Black Demon suddenly slapped on his thigh and yelled, a while ago, my Black Demon Guild lured some new members into the guild with great efforts. I've been wondering why some of them are offline recently. Is it possible that they were? He gazed at the screen in concentration. Soon, he realized the situation. Could it be that these bastards? How far is that place from here? Can I go there by flying on a sword? He jumped up with the urge to grab a weapon and kill those guys. Meanwhile in the Zhuhai City shop, people like Dong Qingli had just entered the shop. Seeing the rows of awesome on the big screen, she asked curiously, what's happening? How come the big screen is so lively today? Hey hiya. Laughing, Song King Feng pointed at the big screen and said, you just missed an excellent scene. That kid of the Taixi faction showed off his lightning spell, but the shop owner used the godly sword lightning controlling true spell. Now, look at that kid's face. Where? Hearing his words, many people turned their gazes toward the big screen and saw Feng Zai's weird expression as if he had just swallowed a dead fly. What did you cast? Feng Zai yelled. In the history of the whole cultivation world, the spiritual spells of the Taixi faction had been the best, which was why he, a cultivator at the early stage of the Divine Ocean Realm, was so arrogant. In theory, early-stage Emperor warriors could defeat early-stage Divine Ocean Realm cultivators, but the cultivators of the Taixi faction should be the exception. Their skills on the spiritual spells were above most cultivation factions. But now, the spiritual spell that he was proud of looked as ridiculous as a toddler who was learning to walk in front of Feng Qi. Even the lightning energy that he gathered with great efforts joined the horrifying vortex of dark clouds above Feng Qi. Then, the lightning bolts crashing down. While shouts of alarm and shrilling screams sounded, Feng Zai, who had been overbearing a moment ago, turned ashen-faced. While screams sounded, lightning bolts that were as thick as a bucket crashing down. Xuanhuan soon sent a bullet comment. Taoist friends of Zhuhua City, what faction is this? The Nanhua heavenly light before the improvements was no match for godly sword lightning controlling true spell. How dare this guy show off his lightning spell before Mr. Fang? Taoist friends of Half City are also watching the live stream. Awesome, sir. The cultivators of Half City are watching this too. Song King Feng put his palm on his forehead and sent a comment. This messenger of the Taixi faction disgraced himself in front of people outside this continent. That seems to be true. Hey hiya. Awesome. He even disgraced himself overseas. How dare you? At this moment, several extremely powerful auras shot out from inside of the gate and crashed toward Fang Qi and Nalan Hongwu with aggressive force. Standing before the gate, Fang Qi and Nalan Hongwu felt a horrifying spiritual suppression crashing down like a huge mountain. A high-pitched voice came from the inside. You are acting so overbearing with only this bit of strength? A deep voice said, self-important. How dare you show off in front of the Taixi faction? In a small pavilion beside the cliff several kilometers away from the gate, two cultivators, one with black hair and the other with white hair, were playing chess. I'm surprised that they even defeated Feng Zai. They have some abilities. Despite their abilities, they are only warriors. They pose no threat to us. The advantage of cultivators over warriors lied in all kinds of ranged attack methods. Cultivators could kill warriors several times from miles away before the warriors could see them. While the horrifying spiritual suppression crashing down, the black-haired cultivator put down one black chess piece on the chessboard. Before the gate, a Kirin statue suddenly became alive. With a roar, it pounced at the two invaders with tremendous force. As the array was activated, Fang Qi and Nalan Hongwu felt as if they were sinking in a pool of mud and couldn't move their legs under the horrifying spiritual suppression. It seemed like they were bound to huge boulders that weighed more than 10,000 pounds. No, it's an array. They are trapped. The audience watching the live stream were startled. FCK off. Nalan Hongwu yelled with fury while he punched onto the Kirin's paws with vicious force. With an earth-shaking noise, the surging force sent him flying backward. Meanwhile, the white-haired cultivator put down a white chess piece. A lightning bolt struck down toward Fang Qi silently. If not for his extremely quick reflexes, he would have been struck into a piece of scorched coal. Meanwhile, dozens of statues around them became alive. Many rare beasts and precious birds launched attacks. It looked random and messy, but they were in a mysterious pattern. Even 100 people couldn't deal with these creatures, let alone just two. Haha, you overestimated yourselves. Right, the black-haired old man said with a smile. The stone-grinding array of our faction is designed for dealing with invaders. It doesn't matter how high their cultivation strengths are. They will run out of spiritual essence and die in the array. They can even deal with the stone-grinding array at the gate, the white-haired old man said with a snicker. How do they dare to mess with our Taixi faction? They overestimated themselves by too much. They are seeking death. This kind of warriors are just like cats. The black-haired old man shook his head. We can crush them with just our fingers. I'm afraid that they will die pathetically and won't know what happened before they can even see us, the white-haired old man said smugly. Hey hiya. Seeing Nalan Hongwu and Fang Qi, who were still struggling in the array, they looked at each other and laughed. Before their laughter stopped, a black sword energy flew over out of the blue. The sharp sword energy transformed instantly into a horrifying huge sword. The smiles instantly froze on their faces. Then, a terrified voice yelled, where did the sword come from? Besides the black sword, a silver, snake-like light beam danced in the sky before turning into many swords. They looked like a sword curtain. This the white-robed old man yelled. What's this? Comments appeared on the screens. This is a sword control technique. They should come out and broaden their view. The two old guys spend their days playing chess on the mountain. How dare they scheme against the shop owner? Haha, you will probably die pathetically, not knowing what happened even after you see it. Chapter 375, Plan and Come. Nalan Hongwu injected a tremendous amount of warrior ki into the sword, and the horrifying sword energy instantly cut open the protective spiritual light on these two cultivators' protective spiritual artifacts. Impossible. Who did it? The two cultivators looked around in terror but saw no one. Where is this person who launched the sneak attack? The black-haired cultivator roared, It's not righteous to sneak attack. Come out and battle with me in the open if you dare. Horror was clearly written on their faces. Comments flooded the big screens of the shops that belonged to Origin's Internet Club. Now you want to battle in the open? Where were you a moment ago? Hahaya. A group of old beastards dare to incite the major factions to attack our Dajing? The shop owner is awesome. Sir, raise their headquarters to the ground. On the screen, the blades poured down like a real storm. The entrance of the faction returned to normal while all kinds of huge rare beast stone statues returned to their original positions. Then, the sky cleared. Master, bad news. Inside the Taixi faction, a disciple ran in from the outside in a panic. In a white robe, Dwaiwu Holiness looked calm with a fishing rod in his hand. Calm down. Tell me. What happened? That Mr. Fang of the Origins Internet Club is here to cause trouble to our faction. The white-robed disciple said in panic. He has come? Dwaiwu Holiness laughed and said, I'm surprised that he came so soon, but it's what I want. Don't worry. The gate is guarded by the black and white elders on top of many disciples. Even if he's extremely powerful, it will take him some time to break in. No, the disciple explained, they have broken in already. Calm down. Do you remember what I taught you? He withdrew the fishing rod and looked up, and he saw many swords forming a giant sword curtain in the sky. Then, the swords poured down like the raindrops in a storm. Master, the disciple shrieked in alarm. What is that? How dare you? Dwaiwu Holiness immediately tossed away the fishing rod, and his face turned dark. Where are black and white? Where did they go? The stone grinding array was broken. The disciple said anxiously, they've broken in. I'm afraid that something bad has happened to the black and white elders. What? Dwaiwu Holiness's expression changed drastically. Beastards, how dare they? They dare to break into my faction and mess with us? With a cold smile, Dwaiwu Holiness brushed the dust off his clothes and said, come out with me. Shall we activate the faction guarding Grand Array? The disciple asked. How many are there? 2. The disciple said while pointing out 2 fingers. Only 2. Look at your panicking face. Dwaiwu Holiness said in a cold voice, the faction guarding Grand Array is the ultimate treasure that our ancestral masters left to us thousands of years ago. Do you think these 2 people deserve the activation of our faction guarding Grand Array? Summon some of your senior brothers and sisters to go out with me and check the situation. Yes, the disciple answered with sweat on his forehead. Meanwhile, at the eastern border of Dajin, a large group of warships from Linglang Mountain was making preparations with a large cultivator army. Ugh, what's happening? A white-robed elder looked around the sky. Strange. Elder, what's wrong? Report. At this moment, a messenger came to report. Family Master sent a message, ordering us to move to Dao Persing Slope 15 kilometers away and meet with cultivators of the Dragon Sea Taoist Palace. Meanwhile, the cultivators of the Dragon Sea Taoist Palace also received a message. Report. Palace Master sent a message, saying that Dajin has moved its army to block the cultivators of Linglang Mountain. He ordered us to attack the capital of Dajin directly. The cultivators of Jade Hill Mountain also received messages. Meanwhile, outside the gate of Dajin, in a war of this scale, the masters of the major factions and big families didn't need to battle in person. They just needed to move their troops and let the elders take charge. After all, it was an easy war for them. Right now, the masters of the factions and big families gathered together to celebrate their imminent victory. It's said that Dajin defeated the Yundian Upper Realm. Are you guys sure that we will win this war? How certain are you guys? The Fat Zhu family master from Linglang Mountain swallowed a mouthful of delicacies and wine before asking the question. I heard that the spiritual boats of Linglang Mountain are only second to those from the Guangshu family, and the warships share the top position with those from the Guangshu family in the Yundian Upper Realm. The Jade Hill Mountain Master, who was wearing a bright green robe, clapped his hands and said admiringly, now that Linglang Mountain has sent as many as 30 warships, how can we doubt our ability of defeating a group of warriors? Hiya, thank you for your praise, the fat middle-aged cultivator said with a laugh. I'm sure that my warships are as good as those from the Guangshu family. Also, I heard that the arrays of the Dragon Sea Taoist Palace are unrivaled. My Linglang Mountain is no match for you in this area. Thank you. The old Taoist of the Dragon Sea Taoist Palace said with a smile, in my opinion, the spiritual artifacts of Jade Hill Mountain are special and powerful, and I'm sure that they will catch Dajin off guard. Maybe we won't even have a chance to cast our spells. Hey hiya. The Jade Hill Mountain Master said, from the looks of it, It's a piece of cake to raise Dajin to the ground. Eh? What then? These warriors are so poor that we won't get much loot anyway. I don't agree. They have gained a lot of benefits after their battle with the Yundian Upper Realm. I heard that Yundian Upper Realm gave them mountains of crystals and all kinds of rare treasures. The person who spoke was the white-clothed, middle-aged man who yelled that he wouldn't stop until he destroyed the evil force in Dajin earlier. We'd better remove all the evil forces this time. It will be a good deed for our cultivation world. This is the Jade Hill Mountain Master looked at the white-clothed, middle-aged man and asked curiously. This is Heavenly Sun Faction Master. The Fat Family Master of Linglang Mountain introduced him. The Heavenly Sun Faction seldom sends disciples into the outside world. Since we all agree, the Jade Hill Mountain Master said, we just need to wait here for the news of victory. Ugh? At this moment, the old Taoist of Dragon Sea Taoist Palace took out his communication jade from his belt and observed it in his hand. Strange. What's wrong? I sent a message to Elder Liu of our faction, but haven't received a reply after a long time, the Dragon Sea Taoist said in bafflement. Now that you mention it, Zhu Family Master also took out his communication jade and said in puzzlement, I haven't received a reply either. What's wrong with these people? The Zhu Family Master said angrily, are they so absorbed by the many treasures of Dajin that they don't have time to reply to us? Let's drink. Jade Hill Mountain Master said, it's just a mere Dajin. We'll receive a reply after they capture Dajin's Emperor. Chapter 376, The World-Ending Sword 23. A 1,000-step stairway led to the main gate of the Taixi faction. Disciples of Taixi faction were swarming up like waves through the wide steps. Furthermore, several extremely powerful auras soared up into the sky inside the faction. Who dares to mess with our Taixi faction? A clear yell sounded. In the dream, I lay on snow like jade in the clear void. A male chanted the words. Another voice continued, looking back on the mortal world, 1,000 years have passed. Singing in the northern wind and laughing in the sky, a female voice chanted, I return to the peak of Taixi and seek Tao. 4 figures stood at the top of the gate, which was so high that it looked like a sharp sword piercing into the clouds. People looked up and saw 4 celestial-looking cultivators standing there with their robes flapping and hair and beard fluttering in the wind. They looked like immortals descending into this world. Hey hiya! Inside the Taixi faction, celestial clouds and mist floated around the mountains as if some immortals were living in here. I'm surprised that Zhu, Chen, Kang, and Tao, these 4 elders, have come out of seclusion cultivation today. Excellent. An old man wearing a fluttering white robe with golden patterns flew over on a golden cloud with a group of cultivators. The old man who was wearing a white robe in the middle of the group was Dwyu Holiness. Bullet comments flooded the big screens in the Origins Internet Club. Smooth. They are actually reciting poems when they came out. FCK. They look so cool. It's indeed a major faction with all its celestial clouds and auspicious creatures. I have a bad feeling for the shop owner. Meanwhile, the audience in the half-city shop were watching the scene, sitting on the couch. Black Demon said, this faction looks FCKING awesome. Wang Lingqi, the Zichi spiritual master, and Tiangzu Taoist looked at each other. Hiss. How come this faction looks even grander than ours? People like Mozian and Yuyan were whispering to each other. I thought they only had the Wui Taoist alliance over there. How come they have such a powerful faction? It's said to be one of the most ancient factions in that continent. Do you think the shop owner will be in trouble? I hope not. However, the shop owner once crashed while he took us flying. What can he do then? He can run with the sword control technique. They won't be able to catch him. Shut up. Obviously, they began to worry when they saw this scene. At this moment, standing high at the top of Taixi faction's gate, Kainzhu, who was wearing a tall hat, said, the warrior of the early stage Emperor Warrior Realm doesn't deserve your attention. Let me deal with them. The mountain gate is guarded by white and black, right? I wonder if those 2 old guys have gotten dumb with too much chess playing that they couldn't stop warriors of such a low realm. Liaochen said with contempt. Dwyu Holiness said with a smile, thank you, Kainzhu spiritual master. The Taoist with the high hat waved the Taoist whisk in his hand and said in a cold voice, you 2 can fight me together. Let me see what abilities you have. After all, his cultivation strength had reached level 7 of the Divine Ocean Realm, which was more than enough to deal with a warrior of the early stage of the Emperor Warrior Realm. Meanwhile, The bullet comments flooded the big screens in Origin Internet Club. Awesome. When can I be as awesome as you? He dares to battle both Senior Nalan and Mr. Fang at the same time? So arrogant. A gust of wind lifted the Kainzhi spiritual master into the air, and he beckoned at the two guys standing on the step. Come on! Before he could finish his words, a figure shot toward them while stepping on a flying sword at a speed unimaginable to ordinary cultivators. Before the Kainzhi spiritual master could react, a pot-sized fist expanded before his eyes swiftly until it covered his whole face. Ah! With a shrilling scream, a figure was knocked down from the sky like a cannonball. Boom! The crash put a huge crater in the steps on the mountain path. A figure struggled up from the huge crater with gritted teeth. His protective spiritual light barrier shattered, and he had a dark purple fist-shaped bruise on his face while his nose had become crooked. Hey hiya! The cultivators of the Taixi faction are so lame. This lame guy dares to take on both Senior and the shop owner? The cultivators in the Origin Internet Club laughed so hard that they had stitches in their sides. Nalan Hongwu beckoned at the four of them. All of you, come together. All the cultivators of the Taixi faction were stupefied. The Kainzhi spiritual master wiped the blood from his face and said with a wicked expression, I indeed underestimated you. But you dare to take on the four of us at the same time? Form the four-symbol grand array. At his sharp shout, the other three deists answered with clear and long yells. Changyang position. Where are the disciples for the Changyang position? Furious, Kainzhi roared and leaped up into the sky while disciples gathered under him. Shang position. Liaochen flew down from the high mountain gate and took the second position. Disciples for the Shang position. Changyan position. Shan position. At the order of Kainzhi, the disciples stood in formations. Instantly, violent winds rose, and the clouds surged while Nalan Hongwu and Fang Qi stood under the eye of the storm. The moment that the array was formed, a horrifying suppressive aura crashed down on them. More astonishing was that the array emptied all the spiritual essence around them, which meant that it was impossible to absorb spiritual essence from nature, let alone borrow the heavenly power. Do you see this? Kainzhi sneered after he was sure that these two people were trapped in the array. But don't panic. What you see now is just a fraction of the power of the four-symbol grand array. In this array, you can't use the essence of the surroundings, let alone draw power from the heaven and the earth. I'll see how you can fight with us. Nalan Hongwu looked at Mr. Fang, and the latter shrugged. It seems that I can't use the godly sword lightning controlling true spell anymore. In the Origins Internet Cafe. Really? The godly sword lightning controlling true spell is restricted? They are despicable. They are using the full strength of their faction against Mr. Fang and Senior Nalan. They even formed an array. Shame on them. Hey hiya! Kainzhi laughed wildly and said, you dare to take on all of us? I will satisfy your request. Duiwu Holiness stroked his beard calmly and said with a nod, they overestimated themselves. It seems I don't have to show my hand. With a flick of his sleeves, he turned around and didn't care to watch anymore. Let's go. Yes, master. The moment that the words were said, Duiwu Holiness felt a horrifying soul-shaking sword spirit spreading all over the sky. The terrifying sword spirit seemed to come from hell, and one trace of it could send chills down people's spines. Master. Then, he heard a scream of alarm. My body, how come I can't move? Nalan Hongwu yelled. You dare to look down on warriors? Today, I'll show you my world-ending sword. 23. Chapter 377. The warriors strike back. Around the four-symbol grand array, violent winds, dragon-like lightning bolts, and phoenix-like flames exploded with extremely horrifying power, sending sand and rocks flying. The four-symbol grand array combined the forces of many disciples of the Taixi faction, and the array made changes according to the great Tao of nature. The moment that it emitted light, it could kill any Grand Masters or Grand Warriors. Kainzhi's lips curved up with a sneer. I'll see how long you can last. However, in the next moment, his smile froze on his face. He saw the violent gusts of wind suddenly freezing in the air around the center of the big array. Instantly, the spiritual spells, spiritual light, and even the entire array stopped moving. The dancing lightning bolts froze in the air, and the surging flood hovered in the sky strangely even though it didn't freeze into ice. It just stayed there, not moving at all. It wasn't flowing, and no water droplets fell from it. Nalan Hongwu emitted a layer of crystal light all over his body, looking extremely weird. In this instant, everything seemed to have paused in the long river of time that was flowing forward without stopping. What is this? If they could open their mouths, they would yell in horror. But at this moment, They couldn't even open their mouths as if their bodies were not in their control. As for the cultivators who hovered in the air under the support of spiritual essence, they didn't fall from the sky even though the spiritual essence in their bodies had stopped circulating. They just froze in mid-air, as stiff as stone statues. Their faces froze before they could reveal any horror, but the intense gloominess in their eyes showed the panic and fear inside. With extreme shock, they watched the white-haired old man stroll up to them casually. The sharp sword energy spread out as if it could cut open everything in the world, but no blood was seen spilling out. The sky had darkened, turning this place into a pitch-black space. The shadow of death engulfed everyone. This was Sword 23, which looked like the Grim Reaper was entering the mortal world. Even the audience in the shops could sense the horrifying sword spirit from the screens, let alone the cultivators in front of the gate of Taixi faction. Seeing Nail and Hong walking closer, Xuanhuan and the others desperately wanted to attack but found that they couldn't move their bodies or even their spiritual essence. No one could believe that the scene before them was truly happening. Neither could one imagine that this attack was cast by a warrior. However, in front of the undeniable fact, all the cultivators of the Taixi faction had to admit that this man who brought them endless horror was a warrior that they had looked down upon. This was the power of Sword 23. Once it was cast, everything lost the right to live, and everything had to wait to be butchered. It was a horrifying technique that could even suppress the laws of space. This period of time seemed very long, as if 10,000 years had passed, and they had come to the end of time. Even Xuanhuan Holiness had a deep chill in his eyes, feeling as if a surge of cold air ran up from his spine to his skull. The power was so horrifying that it went beyond his imagination. Is this guy still a warrior? How can such a horrifying warrior exist in the world? At this moment, a yellow butterfly flew out of Xuanhuan Holiness' body and landed on his shoulder. At a closer look, one could see that the butterfly looked like it was made of yellow jade. Xuanhuan Holiness acquired it from the depth of the cultivation realm, and it was one of his best trump cards. With the help of this yellow jade butterfly, which was said to be related to an ancient fallen immortal, and since he stood at the very edge of this horrifying hell, he had a chance to flee. When Sword 23 was finished, most of the disciples gathered before the mountain gate. The four-symbol grand array including Taoist Zhu, Chen, Kang and Dao, and even the whole mountain gate was destroyed. My Xuanhuan Holiness looked at the scene before him with horror. He hadn't imagined such an end only 1 moment ago. My Taixi faction lost almost half of its elites here. Hurry! Like a fish out of water, Xuanhuan Holiness panted frantically. Hurry! Open the faction guarding grand array. While yelling hysterically, he took out his communication jade with a terrified expression. All of his previous calmness was gone. The audience in Origin's Internet Club broke into loud cheers. Awesome! So powerful! I guess this old guy is so scared that his head is not working. Black Demon, Wang Lingqiai, and the other cultivators who hadn't watched Wind and Cloud yet were stunned. What is this technique? Is he really just a warrior? Terrified, Tang Yuan immediately sent a bullet comment. How come warriors over there are so powerful, but the warriors in our region are so weak? I recommend you to watch Wind and Cloud. So do I. I'm surprised that Senior has mastered the old Sword Saint Sword 23. Warriors including Jiwu commented, its power is a little less than the strike used by the old Sword Saint. Otherwise, no one could leave this place alive. Meanwhile, a pair of eyes suddenly opened in the depth of Taixi faction. This black-clothed cultivator emitted an abyss-deep aura, and he was the tall, black-robed old man who had once sat beside Xuanhuan Holiness by the lake. This sword spirit is so horrifying. His face turned dark. How come my Taixi faction has made such a powerful enemy? He was holding an 8-trigram disc which emitted waves of mysterious and mystical spiritual light. Meanwhile, stars surged in the sky above the Taixi faction as if the circulation of energy in the array pulled on many stars in the high sky. Under the guidance of the array, many spiritual light beams condensed into huge beams of spiritual essence before crashing down from the stars. The spiritual essence in the earth also gathered and rose until a tremendous amount of spiritual essence surged up tempestuously in the space between the heaven and the earth. Faction guarding Grand Array? Why is the faction guarding Grand Array activated? What happened? Darkness engulfed the faction gate, but the disciples of the Taixi faction on other peaks saw huge beams of spiritual essence shooting down from the sky. It has been thousands of years since the faction guarding Grand Array was last activated. Everyone in the Taixi faction turned their gazes to this place. They had never imagined that their faction would be forced into such a tight corner by a warrior. Obviously, The Taixi faction had realized the power of its enemies and had thus activated its full force. Chapter 378, Godly Weapon Fragments. Got it. The place where the Taixi faction imprisoned the disciples of the different factions was extremely secret and hard to find. After all, The Taixi faction was large, and it wasn't easy to find a small group of people in it. Even with the clues provided by Mr. Fang, Su Tianji took a long time to find the mystic place. One by one, under the watchful eyes of many cultivators, the disciples stood in a long line and walked toward the high platform before them. On the high platform, there was a spiritual artifact that was attached to a piece of equipment which looked like an iron helmet. A couple of cultivators hustled forward a cultivator in the line and pushed him up to the platform. Put it on. No, it was a young disciple who was about 17 years old, and he was wearing a pale gray robe. He looked at the item before him with a horrified expression and shrunk his body. It seemed like he had experienced something horrifying before and didn't want to repeat it. At this moment, the two grand cultivators of the True Lake realm standing on both sides of him sneered and looked at each other. Then, they grabbed his arms and sealed his spiritual essence, which was only at the Yuan River realm, with their own powerful cultivation base before pressing him down on the high platform. Tian Lizi looked at the scene without showing any emotions. This guy has a lot of poison remaining in his body, which is why he is resisting so much. It seems that he needs more time with this lightning treatment. He showed a genial smile and said, "Little guy, you must cooperate with the healing process if you want to recover soon. After we remove most of the poison in your body, I will alleviate the treatment intensity. Do you understand?" Then, he waved his hand and said, "Begin." No. While struggling, the disciple was pushed up. Soon, everyone heard a series of trailing screams. Despicable. Extremely despicable. Su Tianji's beautiful eyes were full of fury. She had never felt so furious before in her life. She had heard from Mr. Fang that the Taixi faction had imprisoned the disciples but didn't know anything beyond that. Now, watching this scene, her heart turned cold. What are they doing? Even criminals are not tortured in this inhumane way. These disciples were mostly 17 or 18 years old, the perfect age for cultivation. Furthermore, they were not ordinary disciples but highly talented ones. They would grow into excellent cultivators even if they couldn't become core disciples. They would receive extra care and help even if they were at the Luyan Taoist Palace. They represented the future of their respective factions. No. At this moment, a girl's sobbing and fearful voice sounded. Su Tianji looked toward it and saw a round-faced girl who was about 16 years. Despair was written all over her face. Such a talented young female disciple would be doted by her senior brothers and master. But obviously, Tian Lizi didn't have any pity for her, and he waved his hand. Stop! A furious yell came. Someone broke in. Stop her! Gloomy-faced, Tian Lizi didn't know how this intruder had entered this place, but his top priority was catching her. Meanwhile, huge beams of spiritual essence connected the heaven and the earth, and the tremendous spiritual essence from different mountains of the Taixi faction came together and formed a huge, perfect array. Seeing this, Guilu Holiness, who had just fled from the horrifying sword spirit, felt relieved. He turned his head and saw Nalan Hongwu's pale face, and he laughed and said, "It seems that the technique you used consumed a lot of your warrior ki. After all, it's not easy for you to deal with a big array formed by 4 cultivators of the late stage of the Divine Ocean realm, right? What a pity." "Indeed, it's a pity that I didn't kill you, old bastard." Nalan Hongwu snorted. Obviously, he had just understood Sword 23, and the power was limited. Although he had broken the 4-symbol Grand Array and killed many masters of the Taixi faction, Guilu Holiness had escaped with the help of a rare treasure, which was a surprise to Nalan Hongwu. "That's not what I meant." Guilu Holiness shook his head slowly. "You're only an emperor warrior, but you almost killed me here. You are the #1 warrior in the entirety of history, and I don't expect that there will be another warrior as powerful as you in the future. Even I am jealous of you. If you don't die, you will probably change the power dynamic between cultivators and warriors on this continent for about 1,000 years. As an emperor warrior who is at the 7th realm for warriors, you possess the same combat ability as a cultivator of the same realm. The 7th realm, Divine Palace realm." His face turned dark while he snickered. "But today, you will die here." "Die here?" Nalan Hongwu sneered. "You are almost running out of your strength." Guilu Holiness stared at him and said coldly, Do you still want to resist us? Or his gaze turned to Fang Qi as if he was looking at an ant. Do you really expect this wastrel at the grand ancestral warrior realm, 2 realms lower than yours, to help you escape? The moment that he finished his sentence, a lot of surging spiritual essence in the sky formed a huge 8-trigram pattern which covered the whole Taixi faction. Seeing that the huge 8-trigram pattern was made, Dwaylu Holiness laughed wildly. Do you see that? This is the 8-trigram pattern that I inherited from the prehistoric immortal Tao. It can even trap the legendary demi-immortals who are ready to ascend, let alone you, an emperor warrior. Of course, he exaggerated a bit. After all, this array was created long ago, and the successors could understand just a tiny part of its power, which meant that it was hard for them to unleash its full force. Despite all this, it was more than enough to deal with an emperor warrior who had little warrior ki left in his body. Nalan Hong glanced at Fang Qi and said in a deep voice, "Kid Fang, it's time to go. Elder Su must have done her job now." "Go now?" Mr. Fang shook his head and said, "Didn't I state my intention?" "What intention?" Nalan Hong was nonplussed. "I told you guys my intention before we came," Mr. Fang said. "I asked you who wanted to come with me to raise the Taixi faction to the ground." "What? So arrogant?" Instantly, the curses of Taixi faction disciples resonated in the sky. Meanwhile, Mr. Fang glanced at his godly weapon fragments and the godly weapons trading list. Immortal Slaying Ancient Sword Fragment, single usage. Allow the user to achieve complete synchronization with a character in the TV series Jade Dynasty. Required total synchronization, 20%. Kusanagi Sword, the King of Fighters Fragment, single usage. Allow the user to achieve complete synchronization with a game character who had used Kusanagi Sword. Required total synchronization, 20%. Awakens Sword Fragment, Heavenly Mirror Fragment. Yes, this was what the system meant when it told Mr. Fang to explore himself. Chapter 379, Turning Everything to Nothing. However, since different godly weapons unleashing different forces, the godly weapons needed different numbers of godly weapon fragments. For example, 2 godly weapon fragments were needed to trade for 1 heavenly mirror fragments. Even if he traded, he only had achieved 5% total synchronization with the White Brow Spiritual Master, which was still far from the target of 20% synchronization. The Wiccan Sword was relatively cheap, but this godly weapon wasn't very powerful, thus the synchronization time would be decreased. Which should I choose this time? Mr. Fang stroked his chin. Since we're on the live stream, and the audience in Half City Shop have already seen Sword God, maybe I will use something new today. Kid Fang, what are you waiting for? Nalan Hong saw that Fang Qi was still hesitant. At this moment, Dwaylu Holiness flew to the 8-trigram platform outside the Taixi Palace. Holding an order flag which was embroidered with symbols of water, wood, wine, and fire. He pointed it to the south and said, "Lee position." Burning Sun True Flame. A wave of horrifying burning flames poured down from the huge 8-trigram disc in the sky as if the Grand Supreme Taoist knocked over his 8-trigram furnace. TL note: Grand Supreme Taoist is a famous immortal in traditional Chinese legends. The horrifying red flames swept all over the space and even turned the surrounding air on fire. Nalan Hongwu's face turned dark since he could sense the horrifying high temperature even from afar. The flames felt so hot that they seemed like they could melt people instantly. The flames pouring down from the sky would burn the 2 people on the ground to ashes in the next moment. With a chilly expression, Dwaylu Holiness was determined to kill them and remove all potential future trouble. He began to smile while he saw the scene. "Even though you are the most talented and most powerful warrior I've ever seen, you must die here today. I can't let such a huge threat escape from me. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, you can't withstand the Burning Sun True Flame. Go to hell." However, at this moment, Fang Qi suddenly revealed a sword fragment in his hand while a row of mystic data flashed in his eyes. Then, Fang Qi's robe fluttered even though there was no wind. His black hair turned white, and it waved in the air as well. His eyes opened slowly, emitting chilly spiritual light. His golden snake pupils contained endless darkness which looked like a black void. Like the heavenly Tao, his eyes emitted deep mercilessness and chilliness as if he disregarded everything in the world. As if supported by an invisible force, he hovered silently in the air, disregarding any rules governing the heaven and the earth. What's the shop owner doing? I've never seen this before. At this moment, all the audience watching the live stream felt chills running down their spines. Even Ruan Ning, who liked to mock Fang Qi, shivered uncontrollably. Standing in the air, Fang Qi suddenly raised his hand. A surge of a horrifying magnetic field appeared, and the force started to cycle around him as he waved his hand. In the blink of an eye, a horrifying black shadow appeared before him. The shadow expanded and contracted alternatively, swallowing the flames like a black hole or a hurricane sweeping across the land. That is, Song King Feng suddenly yelled in shock. Shockwave. That's Shockwave. Watching the live stream in concentration while sitting on the couch in Half City Shop, Lu Ningyan and Ningbai, who had played the King of Fighters, jumped up in shock. Sun Shockwave? Almost all the audience yelled in astonishment. Is this Orochi? Note: in the legends, the Kusanagi sword was drawn out from the tailbone of Orochi. Boom! With a series of huge noises, the sun shockwave crashed onto the 8-trigram disc in the sky with vicious force. The spiritual patterns of the 8-trigram disc, condensed by many beams of spiritual essence, shook under the strike. It became unstable. Impossible. Duayu Holiness's face paled as he stared at the white-haired young man who was standing in the air. Who are you? He roared in horror. The snake pupils sent chills down his spines. However, no one answered him. Duayu Holiness saw the white-haired young man suddenly dim and then vanish silently. In the next moment, the figure appeared behind him. The figure slightly waved his hand, and a huge, horrifying magnetic force rushed out like a storm. Boom! Boom! The moment that Duayu Holiness turned his head, the dense, complicated 8-trigram patterns around his body lit up. These trigram patterns contained most of the array's power, but they shook and looked as if they would fall apart under Fang Qi's casual attack. How can it be? Who on earth are you? Not daring to reserve his strength, Duayu Holiness activated all the power of the Grand Array. Horrifying forces including earth, fire, water, and wind gushed out from the huge 8-trigram disc in the sky. These forces countered and complemented each other, forming an extremely powerful combined force in the array. Meanwhile, the stars moved positions in the sky above the Grand Array while a lot of starlight fell and gathered in the middle of it. I'll show you the true power of this Grand Array. Duayu Holiness roared furiously, and the black-robed old man sitting in the center of the array injected all of his spiritual essence into the 8-trigram disc in his hand. The symbols on the disc moved and gradually derived out the most powerful pattern. The mountains under the Taixi faction shook continuously as if an earth dragon were making a turn. This was the shaking of the spiritual veins underground. Obviously, the person controlling the array had activated most of the spiritual essence from the underground spiritual veins. Kid Fang, run! Nalan Hong was sensed that this force was beyond the resistance of human power. However, at this moment, a huge crack opened in the dark clouds behind Fang Qi, who was still hovering in the air. Meanwhile, Fang Qi brought his arms to his chest and crossed them. All the people stared at the scene in horror. This is... The players who had played the King of Fighters shouted, "This is the starting move of Orochi Divine Light." Meanwhile, Fang Qi's lips slightly moved as if he was chanting a mysterious and incomprehensible incantation. But strangely, everyone could understand the meaning of the words. Let everything return to nothing. In the sky covered by gloomy clouds and howling wind, the opening grew larger and larger as if the sky was cracking open. Many light beams shot down, and everything was bathed in the sunlight. The audience watched while the huge 8-trigram disc in the sky, including the derived forces of earth, fire, water, and wind, was cut and disintegrated around Duayu Holiness. The trigram patterns condensed by the array dimmed at a visible speed. He had never looked so terrified before. Impossible. Chapter 380. You deserve a terrible ending. Duayu Holiness widened his eyes as if he was trying to better understand the scene and the young man before him. He just couldn't understand what force could be this terrifying. He felt that the energy in the faction guarding Grand Array, the spiritual vein, and the stars were being consumed at a fast rate to fend off this force. No, impossible. Duayu Holiness roared. This is an ancient Grand Array passed down from the prehistoric times. The ancestral master told us that it could even trap and kill demi-immortals. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. He murmured to himself, looking crazy and mad. Then, he saw something even more terrifying. A crack appeared in the center of the huge 8-trigram pattern, which was purely condensed by spiritual essence. Then, more cracks appeared. 2, 3, 4. Many cracks appeared, and the entire array was shaking. The disciples and elders of the other two saint factions, Xuanhuan Manor and Yugzh Mountain, all looked up at the terrifying scene in the distant sky in horror. It looked as if the end of the world had come. What is that? That's in the direction of Taixi faction. Seeing this scene, extreme horror and shock entered their eyes. In the half-city shop and the Xuanhuan city shop, the cultivators and warriors who hadn't played the King of Fighters before stood up in horror. What is that? Even Ningbai stood up. She had only seen the overwhelming power of Orochi in the game. She couldn't compare it with anything in the real world, thus she couldn't really feel the power of these moves. However, now she saw the Orochi Divine Light technique being used in the real world. The stunning sensation was many times stronger than what she got from the game. Her eyes that were as green as jade stared at the screen while the array was being dismantled. I decided, I'm going to put more effort into practicing the King of Fighters techniques in the future. The Zichi spiritual master was also gazing at the big screen without blinking. Yunner, do you know what this technique is? Can we learn it in the shop? How come I've never seen it before? It's because you don't play the King of Fighters, Master, Lu Ningyan said earnestly. Yunner, can you show me how to play the King of Fighters? The Zichi spiritual master asked in excitement. If I can merge this technique into our Nanhua heavenly light. She began to dream about the bright future. Heihaya destroyed. All destroyed. Dwaiwu Holiness watched while the Taixi faction's faction guarding Grand Array collapsed. Even the mystical yellow jade butterfly which had saved him from the world-ending Sword 23 shattered into pieces. With hatred in his eyes, his face was wicked like a ghost, and he fell from the sky, covered in blood. Staring at Fang Qi in the sky with hatred, he said, my Taixi faction has done nothing to you. Why are you doing this to us? Aren't you afraid that you will be punished by heaven and struck by lightning? At least from his perspective, the Taixi faction had never messed with Fang Qi in public. I'm here for the disciples of various factions. You imprisoned and are torturing them, Fang Qi said solemnly. What torture? Dwaiwu Holiness roared. Tianlizi. Where's Tianlizi? He laughed hysterically and said, you did this because of those lazy wastrels? Today, I'll bring these wastrels to the tomb with my Taixi faction. Tianlizi. Holiness. Save me, Holiness. At this moment, a figure covered in blood ran over with a terrified expression, chased by hundreds of furious disciples of various factions. Old Beastard, don't run. I'll let you have a taste of the lightning torture. Old Beastard, I treated my master as my father, and the faction treated me as a son. But after today, my heart will feel cold even if I return to them. You destroyed the affection between my master and me that had been built over the past dozens of years. You villains have no right to live. Beastards. The round-faced girl who was about 16 years old yelled in tears. You lied to my dad and made him take me to this place. After the worse-than-death days here, my home and my faction will not be the same to me. No, it's not me. Spotting Dwaiwu Holiness, Tianlizi looked as if he saw his savior. He pointed at Dwaiwu Holiness and said, it's him. He ordered me to do it. It's not my idea. See? He even wants you to die with him. Beastards. Today, I'll give you a taste of lightning torture. Before Fang Qi could finish making a move, the two people were swallowed by the furious crowd. While spiritual essence turned into lightning energy and flashed in the crowd, shrill screams could be heard all over the mountain. Meanwhile, the spiritual boats of Linglang Mountain followed the instructions given to them by their superior and moved to the designated place. However, they were greeted by a wave of horrifying lightning light. This is the warfare spiritual spells of the Guangxu family. Impossible. Has the Guangxu family entered the war against us? How come there are arrays around us? No. We fell into a trap. While alarm yells and shrill screams sounded, the huge group of spiritual boats received great damage under the attacks of the prearranged arrays and the AoE spiritual spells cast by the many warships confiscated from the Guangxu family. Quickly send the message. Tell them that we've fallen into a trap. However, they received no reply, and all the messages they sent were lost like a mud doll in the ocean. The cultivators of Jade Hill Mountain didn't set out until the cultivators of Linglang Mountain fled and most of the high-level members were captured. The big forces soon ventured into the depths of Dajin like headless flies, doing battles separately rather than attacking Dajin together in unison, which was the optimal strategy. Strange. How come Elder Zhu still didn't reply to my message? Jade Hill Mountain Master wondered with the communication jade in his hand. At this moment, noises came from outside, and they heard someone yell, listen up. You've been surrounded. Immediately hand over your spiritual artifacts and surrender to us. What? All the people inside looked displeased. We haven't received any messages yet. Who's making fun of us? After walking out of the palace, they saw about 10 top-level warships of the Guangxu family slowly appearing in the vast blue sky above the city. Meanwhile, in the Taixi faction, the pungent smell of flesh burned by strong lightning permeated the air. "You're audacious." Two powerful auras descended from the sky with magnificent presences. A man and a woman at the late stage of the divine ocean realm landed. The man wore a purple gold headpiece and a purple Taoist robe with golden patterns. He looked handsome and valiant. The woman wore a white Taoist robe with jade patterns. She looked elegant and celestial. They coldly stared at the people before them. Calmly, Mr. Fang lit up a cigarette and said, "You should ask about what they did to drive these furious disciples to do such a thing." He tapped his finger on the cigarette to knock down the ash from the burning end. "Of course, if you want to ignore the cause and avenge them since your three factions moved together, I'm here to deal with you at any time." Even with high cultivation strengths, the man and the woman felt chilly inside. It was a sensation that was uncontrollable. Then, remembering the horrifying light shooting down from the sky, they stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do next. Beep. The task of the power that shocks the world is completed.